Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 80 of the Great Canadian Hockey Podcast. I'm James Parisi here with my co-host Aiden, Sarah, and baby, it's bag packing season. People are moving and shaking. Guys are booking tickets. People are playing for new teams, and man, NHL news is alive and well. It feels like the league's been on fire for the past couple weeks, and now that the trade deadline is over and done with, we can talk about it all. We can see where everything landed. But first and foremost, I got to check in. Aiden, how are we doing, fella? What's new? How's life?
Oh, bro, a little loaded, but you're absolutely right about all the all the stuff going on in hockey. As for me, it's the prospect of change is always scary, right? And it's a time of change right now. But you're absolutely right that I think this trade deadline season being the way it is might not have come at a better time because how much attention is on the league coming off the Four Nations face-off, and you've got a bunch of people paying extra attention to these players, and then all of a sudden you get the most active trade deadline I can remember in a very long time.
Yeah, I feel like nowadays I'm having more conversations with random people at work or in a restaurant or just in day-to-day life. I'm talking about random passersby. These hockey conversations are just flowing and happening way more than usual, and everyone is just so into it. And I love that. I have a great time with it. And you know what? That speaks to maybe a whole new generation of hockey fans having a lot of cool memories to look back on like we have had growing up. So I mean, I love it. I love seeing it. I love watching it happen as it goes in slow motion. And dude, you know I love the chaos. The absolute chaos that some of these transactions have sprinkled throughout the NHL news-wise. I mean, we're gonna get into it all. We're gonna talk shop here, but um, man, I feel like we can't talk any news that isn't trade related right now. Like Aiden, I feel like if we want this to be anything shy of a 3 hour news drubbing podcast, we have to go trades only. You think our listeners are going to be okay with that?
I think so. I do want to know though, James, last 2 weeks, it's been a lot of hockey news, been a lot of hockey swirling, but what's your last 2 weeks been like? How is that how's all the hockey factored into life at James in the last little while?
Well, I feel like my roommate and I have had hockey podcasts on our commutes to and from work instead of music, and that says a lot because you know I'm a
Yeah.
big music guy. Like that's a pretty significant thing. Went to a EDM concert on Saturday with a couple of my buddies, and when we were grabbing a drink downtown beforehand, we spent the entire time at the table for I think 2.5 hours just talking hockey and trying to make fantasy hockey trades. So it's in full takeover mode, man. I can't even escape it right now. Like I just can't
Okay.
get around it. There's nothing I can do.
Well, I suppose that that makes some sense because there was some uncharacteristically active trade and trade movement in our fantasy hockey league this weekend. So the picture's becoming clear that it was just everybody sitting at a table swapping names out there. That's funny.
Yeah, I mean, I had to go after Shea Theodore. When you're when you're a team that isn't gonna win, you got to go target those injured players and load up the contenders with rentals. That's the dynasty format in a nutshell. Trade deadline for the real NHL is just like a trade deadline for us. Unfortunately, our league isn't as loaded with contenders right now, but in a time when there's more parity, that's exactly how it's moving and shaking, and it's a ton of fun. So I really hope that other people's fantasy hockey leagues have been nearly as fun. I think some people definitely aren't as intense as we are. Whereas like we have our own trade deadline. We have 5 straight years of this being a keeper format league where everybody is fighting for draft picks, for the right keepers, for building your dynasty. Like I have Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar, and I'm still going to finish in fourth this year. So that says a lot.
We'll yap so much fantasy in the summer. But you're
Oh,
absolutely right that you know what, James? We haven't even talked about it. Depending on how long we dredge our way through this could be a part one, part two type beat, but we're not going to know until we dive in and start. So let's go March 1st, which was obviously prior to the trade deadline, but this was the first big fish to go. The Florida Panthers get defenseman Seth Jones and a 2026 fourth round pick for goaltender Spencer Knight, and Chicago will get one first round pick, either 2026 or 2027. They also retain 26% of Jones's contract. We talked about Seth Jones potentially being on the move. This felt like the only way it was going to happen if Chicago committed to taking, around, my thinking was maybe around a third of the contract back. James, Florida is absolutely gearing up for another cup run. How does Jones fit? And what do you see? What do you see happening?
honestly, dude, I think he's going to be a seamless fit. I think his style of play is perfect for Florida. I feel like it complements different styles of players they have very well. And I think he's going to be relied on fairly heavily. Maybe not as heavily as he was in Chicago, maybe not as heavily as he was in Columbus, but I think he's probably going to be a 22 minute of the night guy and he's going to work his bag off because you know what? Winning's a lot of fun. I think he's going to
Absolutely.
love it.
Winning's a lot of fun. Spencer Knight goes back the other way. It was former 13th overall pick back in 2019 with Florida, for a while considered the best goaltending prospect in the world. But James, he has arrived in Chicago with 2 wins in 3 games. He made 42 stops on 43 shots against the Kings in his debut. He then stopped 39 in a win over Utah, and just yesterday suffered his first defeat. He made 18 saves on 20 shots, but that was against your James Colorado Avalanche, who are, of course, a significantly better hockey team than the Chicago Blackhawks. Hard to fault him for that one. Knight could be this goaltender for Chicago. You look around their prospect core, you look around their young core, they've got a lot of pieces up front, they've got a lot of pieces on the back end. Don't know what Adam Gajan is going to be. That's the Slovakian prospect goaltender they selected in the second round 2 years ago. But Knight gives them a really, really hopeful future number one, doesn't he?
Indeed, he does. But Aiden, I will say it's very, very hard to be the goalie through a rebuild. And very seldom is that goalie the one that is on the team when they start playing well. So, I mean, I wish him all the best. The guy's been through a lot and speaks volumes to his character, the effort he puts in now with his new team. But, I mean, it's so hard to predict. So I hope for the best for him, and I hope for the best for those Chicago Blackhawks players that are rebuilding with him. But yeah, it could end up moving on one day. It's hard to tell. And that brings us to our next deal. That one being the Edmonton Oilers acquiring quite the unique and special forward in Trent Frederick. Him coming over from the Boston Bruins in exchange for Max Wanner, a second round pick, and a fourth round pick. The New Jersey Devils getting in on the deal as well, helping retain 50% of Frederick's contract and getting forward Shane LaChance. Max Jones and Peter Hauser going to the Edmonton Oilers as well. Aiden, I know you've probably talked about this one a lot already, but how do you feel like Trent Frederick fits into that Oilers system?
It's a guy you want in the playoffs, right? Like there's no certainty about whether you're going to see Evander Kane in action in the playoffs for the Edmonton Oilers. And Trent Frederick, it's an upgrade on what they have in those spots. And the Oilers obviously have been under the microscope for their defense and goaltending for a long time. But if you listen to Stan Bowman talk kind of around the trade deadline, upgrading the middle six was a focus. And I remember saying on the last podcast that that Adam Henrique third line center role, he hadn't been playing to the level they'd been hoping for this season. Frederick not only gives them an upgrade on that third line spot, but he is a significantly tougher player, right? And when the Oilers are going into a playoff series against LA or Vegas, that's gonna impact that series big time.
Definitely couldn't agree more. Moving on to our next deal, the Florida Panthers getting active in the trade market again. This is a trend you'll see continue a little bit throughout this podcast. But Spencer Knight out, Vitek Vanacek in, and them acquiring him from the San Jose Sharks in exchange for center Patrick Giles. Aiden Vitek Vanacek has already had a solid game for the Panthers, and I mean, who knows? Maybe he's found his spot as a backup. Anything to add?
No, just goalie carousel. Backups are probably the most fluid resource in hockey, so unsurprising that this is not the first time we've seen Vanacek move this season.
Definitely. On to a fairly big one. The Tampa Bay Lightning making their splash, acquiring forwards Yanni Gord and Oliver Bjorkstrand alongside Kyle Aucoin and a fifth round pick from the Seattle Kraken in exchange for Mikey Asamont, a first round pick in 2026 and 2027, and a second round pick in 2025. The Kraken retained half of Yanni Gord's contract. The Detroit Red Wings then got in on the deal as a salary helper, broker, whatever you want to call it. They got a conditional fourth round pick in 2025 in exchange for retaining another 25% of Gord's contract. Aiden, this one felt steep. Everyone I talked to says this one feels steep. Even Lightning fans I've talked to say this one feels steep. But you know how this works. If they go and win a cup, no one cares what the price is.
Yeah, we same thing as that Tanner Jeannot deal a couple years ago. Um, yeah, you're right that it is a steep price, but don't underestimate the value that getting Yanni Gord at 25% of his contract would have been to the Tampa Bay Lightning. That is a not insignificant piece of this, that they were able to get Seattle to retain that 50% and then, of course, Detroit to retain the 25. Tampa Bay has historically been a cash strapped team when it comes to money availability at the salary cap. Of course, we remember the way that they've used this the loopholes in the salary cap to their advantage. A lot of people see these three-team trades as a loophole, but it's a resource at their disposal. And obviously, I think the increased price of these players reflects that, it's a little bit of a jumping through hoops situation to get this working.
On to our next trade. Defenseman Vinny Desharnais is really getting used to putting on different sweaters. Now his fourth one in the last 12 months. He was traded from the Pittsburgh Penguins to the San Jose Sharks in exchange for a fifth round pick. I think this is the perfect spot for him,
Yeah, I
realistically.
agree. I think he's gonna play beside Matthew Schaefer next year and beat the crap out of anybody who messes with him.
That sounds fun. Nothing more to add on that one. Pittsburgh Penguins stay active, acquiring defenseman Luke Shen and Tommy Novak, the kind of streaky goal scoring forward from the Nashville Predators, that being in exchange for Michael Bunting and a fourth round pick in 2026. Aiden, Penguins were very active, and all of it felt like fairly smart moves.
Yeah, a
It
lot of it was.
asset management, because they went and shipped. I'm jumping ahead a bit here. They went and shipped Luke Shen over to the Winnipeg Jets in exchange for what, a second and a fourth?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of perfect. That's exactly what you want to be seeing out of a team that's not in contention. Just getting as many assets as you possibly can for assets that could be depreciating or leaving. It's simple management. Makes sense. That's I mean, I am very, very, very far from a professional, but that's what I would be doing in my franchise mode in NHL 25.
Yeah, Tommy Novak I think is a good get because it's kind of much like Cody Glass was, where you're rolling the dice on maybe a guy who looked in the past like he might have a little bit more upside. Novak in his first two seasons was scoring at a pretty good clip, and it just hasn't been
Mhm.
working for him since then. But Pittsburgh, with the obviously the personnel the Penguins have at their disposal, that's a pretty good spot for Novak to get a fresh start, I think.
Moving on to our next deal, the New Jersey Devils acquiring defenseman Brian Dumoulin from the Anaheim Ducks, who, I'll be honest, I forgot even had Dumoulin. I don't know. That didn't feel significant to me, but no disrespect to him. The Anaheim Ducks acquiring right winger Herman Traff, a conditional second round pick in 2025, and also retaining 50% of Dumoulin's contract. And salary retention can be worth a lot sometimes. This is one of those scenarios. Also feel like that Devils team really, really needed, I don't know, some encouragement after Jack Hughes going down for the remainder of the season and potentially playoffs, and just the sputtering form the Devils have been in recently. They needed that, when you see your team go and add, you probably think, okay, you know what, maybe we can do this. Maybe we can go make playoffs. And that's what this ad was to me.
Yeah, you're not you're not wrong about this being a move to bring in a vet, right? It's a move to bring in a guy who's been around the block and has played in a lot of the big games that, like you're gonna have Simon Nemec and Luke Hughes being part of this team and really experiencing a lot of this for the first time. So it's just it's bringing in a vet. I thought a second round pick was a lot to pay, but it's gonna become very obvious, if it's not obvious already, that this was entirely a seller's market. So the teams that were selling received premiums on their players. The teams that were buying paid a premium, and the teams that did neither are what we call stupid.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you there. On to our next deal, Florida staying active yet again. You will hear their name a lot throughout this podcast. Like I feel like we've already mentioned them 3 or 4 times. This time acquiring center Nico Sturm and a seventh round pick from the San Jose Sharks in exchange for a fourth round pick. I have to say I like Nico Sturm as a fourth line forward or a 13th forward kind of thing. He is very solid in his defensive assignments, and he plays hard on the forecheck. He won't add a ton else to your game, but solid nonetheless.
Yeah, agreed.
On to our next one, Riley Smith heading back to Vegas. He's probably in love with that. Not that playing in New York is anything to shake a stick at, but center Brendan Brisson going to the Rangers as well as a third round pick. Aiden, if you are drafted by the Vegas Golden Knights and you show any promise, there's a good chance you're getting traded.
Yeah, I wouldn't buy a house.
No, no, not even a condo in Henderson. Not worth it. Not worth it at all. Riley Smith definitely stoked to be back there. One of those original misfits, and a player with fairly solid history in a young franchise's um, early stories so far. Florida, yet again, on our next deal. Another goalie move. That's 3 goalie moves in one deadline week. Ridiculous. Acquiring goalie Capo Kakinen in exchange for Chris Driedger. Chris Driedger going to the Winnipeg Jets. You got to imagine Kakinen slides in behind Vanacek, right?
Yeah, I think Kakinen's like an emergency guy that they see some upside in, but you're genuinely not expecting to see him play.
Next up, Aiden, your Vancouver Canucks getting involved as sellers, acquiring a third round pick in 2025 in exchange for defenseman Carson Soucy. How you feeling about that one?
Yeah, this was smart. It was an asset that I think unfortunately depreciated in value as this season went on. Like he was
Mhm.
quite the defensive defenseman last year, and it just hasn't worked out in the same way this season. So I'm not too upset to see them salvage a third round pick out of Carson Soucy. I think it became pretty clear that long term he wasn't part of this team's future.
And on the other end, that's the New York Rangers revamping their defensive depth. They added Will Borgen earlier this season, who I know they're really liking, and maybe Susie fits in just as well. Only time will tell. Edmonton Oilers next up, acquiring defenseman Jake Wallman in probably their biggest splash of the year. This is their big fish from all things considered. Back to San Jose, center Carl Berglund and a conditional 2026 first round pick. Aiden, how are we feeling about Jake Wallman? To me, severely lacks experience in these big games, but that doesn't mean he can't perform in those big games. I do think he's a fairly versatile player. How do you think he fits in their system?
Yeah, I think Jake Wallman on the Oilers is going to completely be about what your expectations for him are. If you're expecting him to slide in and be a top three guy, like he's been San Jose's number one all year, if you want him to be a top three guy on an Oilers team that is trying to obviously, push their way into the playoffs and deep into it, I don't think he's going to work in that spot. But if you think about what the Oilers already have in Ekholm and Nurse and Bouchard, the expectation and the pressure on Wallman to be a top three contributor game in game out isn't there. And I think if you have him in a role in a 4, a 5, or a 6 role, that's amazing depth in the playoffs. So Edmonton, honestly, kind of seemed like they were looking to replace Philip Broberg. Um, Obviously, Wallman not as much upside, but they didn't do bad in that effort.
And you talked about this being a seller's market, and Boston, the Bruins were very much sellers. in this next deal, sending for right winger Justin Brazeau to the Minnesota Wild in exchange for Marat Kuznetsov, a sixth round pick, and the reacquisition of center Jacob Lauko. And it really seemed like the Bruins are trying to pile assets on, just getting everything they can back, and maybe different players than they would usually go for. I think if the Bruins were in a playoff push, Marat Kuznetsov is not a player that they're going for. But he's a guy, much like you were talking about Pittsburgh with Cody Glass or Tommy Novak. He's a guy who can generate value and become a better player and eventually be worth more when you eventually go to move on from him. What do you think about that?
Yeah, this is a guy that I could totally see growing into, yeah, like you said, whether it be somebody that contributes to the Bruins down the line or somebody that fetches them an asset in the future. Like I'm kind of thinking you're getting a Vladislav Nemesnikov type contribution, I think, from Kuznetsov on the Bruins, right? Where you're going to be able to utilize him kind of everywhere because he's got a pretty diverse skill set. And getting a couple guys back for Justin Brazeau, like yeah, obviously the market wasn't there on Brazeau for them to get a higher pick, but I think it's a good idea to maybe take a gamble on a couple less proven players than Brazeau because if Husnadinov or Lauko develops forward, you're going to see them get obviously more of a return than maybe they would have got for Brazeau.
Couldn't agree more. Moving on to a big deal made by my Colorado Avalanche, acquiring center Brock Nelson and right winger Will Dufort from the New York Islanders in exchange for a first round pick in either 2026 or 2027, a conditional third rounder in 28, highly touted prospect center Callum Ritchie, defenseman Oliver Shillington, and the retention of half of Brock Nelson's contract. Colorado finally went and got their second line center, a hole that has, by all accounts, been gaping ever since Nazem Kadri left in free agency. I think he fits in seamlessly to that system. I think he's a workhorse and has a lot of scoring upside. Contrary to his numbers this season, I think a lot of that is a reflection of the way the Islanders have played all year long. And Will Dufort, I think he is a guy who could fit pretty seamlessly into Colorado's depth probably next season when some of these rentals aren't there anymore. Yeah, I like what I see there. Aiden, how do you feel about that one?
Yeah, it was a lot. It's hard to part with Callum Ritchie.
Oh, that yeah, I just didn't want to be the one to say that. I was really hoping you would say.
Yeah, like the Ritchie one really stings, and I'm sure that was the last case scenario, right? Like that would have been the last guy that Colorado would have realistically wanted to give up. But unfortunately for the Avalanche, the reality of their current situation is that many of their first round picks, both selected and in the future, have been traded away already. So you are kind of in a tough spot when you're trying to buy somebody like Nelson and don't have a whole lot of assets. They must have made it Ritchie or nothing because otherwise I cannot imagine Colorado parting with him. But the Avalanche think that this is absolutely a year they can win the Stanley Cup. They are not alone in that thinking, obviously, as is obvious, but as is made obvious by how aggressive these buyers have been. But um, yeah, Colorado makes a move that I could easily see making a massive impact down the line in the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Well, definitely, Aiden, because there's one more deal they made just a day or two before the Seth Jones deal that we would have skipped over, but I got to go back and touch on. That's acquiring defenseman Ryan Lindgren and for Jimmy Vesey and the rights to 22-year-old Hank Kempf from the New York Rangers in exchange for a second round pick, a fourth round pick, Juuso Parssinen, and Calvin DeHaan. I mean, that's we're not even done with Colorado's moves yet, and they are loading up. It's it's very evident that this team is all in and thinks that, this is a scenario they can win in. But moving on, the fallout of this Brock Nelson deal. Oliver Shillington was a member of the New York Islanders for all of 24 minutes before being shipped off to the Anaheim Ducks for future considerations. Um, yeah, I mean, maybe he'll get the chance to play some more minutes and maybe kind of reform as a player, try and get back to where he was. I used to really like Oliver Shillington when he was a member of the Calgary Flames. I kind of had high hopes for him kind of regaining his form in Colorado, but no dice there at this point. But who knows? Maybe his time with the Ducks will be very helpful for him.
Yeah, this is just Anaheim getting Shillington because they traded Dumoulin, right? Just an NHL defenseman to
Mhm.
fill the spot on the left side. Next up is you want to talk about overpayments, James. We have the next one here.
Hold the phone. Hold the phone. I'm about to potentially disagree with you for one reason. So, listeners, the deal is Pittsburgh shipping Anthony Beauvillier to the Washington Capitals for a second round pick in 2025. Okay, yes, I agree it's a bit of an overpayment for sure. But you factor in the seller's market, and then you factor in Washington hoping to go on a deep run, and Anthony Beauvillier having scored a couple big playoff goals in his time with the Islanders. Maybe they're hoping he's got a little bit more of that gas left in the tank.
No, I
That's all I
under
have to say on that one. Other than that, I agree with you. It's an overpayment.
yeah, I understand the allure. I think if that's the best you could get, then go somewhere else. Um, this is a guy though, like you said, not just in the playoffs, but he was a beast in 2018, 19, 2019, 20, 2020, 21, and really basically until he started 23, 24 with Vancouver. He was a very effective player everywhere. And then he
Mhm.
had a tough year last year between Vancouver, Chicago, and Nashville. A little bit better this year in Pittsburgh. But yeah, Washington obviously wants that experience in their lineup. Wants that experience potentially playing on the other side of a Ryan Leonard winger pair, James, because Leonard is going to sign in Washington at the conclusion of his season. So that could be a massive addition to the Washington forward core as well.
Definitely fun to see what those guys are gonna do. I feel like they're a team everyone is at least kind of cheering for. Everyone is enjoying watching these Caps be good. But moving on, Los Angeles Kings acquire forward Andrei Kuzmenko in a seventh round pick in 2025, in exchange for a third round pick in 2027. The Philadelphia Flyers retaining half of Kuzmenko's contract, pending UFA, high scoring upside, fun guy. Feel like he fits in there. And damn, don't you think Andre Kuzmenko's stoked to be in Los Angeles?
Yeah, probably. 2 goals and 5 points in 7 games with Philadelphia. This is one of the most perennially streaky players I think I've ever seen in my career. So it could be, the peaks or the valleys really of the Andrei Kuzmenko experience in LA. So fingers crossed for the guy, because yeah, fun-loving dude deserves the best.
All right, time to move on to an absolute blockbuster. We got a couple in a row that are just massive deals. To me, this was kind of the shocker. I mean, these were players that I could definitely see getting moved. There was talk about these players getting moved all season long and even in last year's offseason, but I didn't really think it was going to happen, or at least at this point. The deal is the Ottawa Senators acquiring center Dylan Cousins and defenseman Dennis Gilbert, as well as a second round pick in 2026 in exchange for center Josh Norris and defenseman Jacob Bernard Docker. Aiden, this one is very cool. This is a hockey trade. This
High
is
upside all
hockey
around,
trade of
man.
the year. Yeah.
Yeah, high upside flying around. Josh Norris, man. Josh Norris can be a 40 goal scorer in this league. Dylan Cousins can be a point per game top six center. Were they going to find that potential in, Norris in Ottawa, Cousins in Buffalo? Um, I probably would have been a little bit more confident that Norris would have found it in Ottawa, because the Dylan Cousins in Buffalo had been trending downward now. This was the second consecutive season that you saw pretty significant regression from him. And that's obviously not what you want out of a 23, 24-year-old centerman that you're paying 7.1 million bucks till 2030. Um, Norris is, to me, a guy that I love anywhere in the top six, because he's got the versatility to be an effective centerman. But if you can, slot the guy onto the wing with a good playmaking center, he can also fill the net with goals. He doesn't need to be the play driver. He can be a complementary piece and be super effective as well. So yeah, you're absolutely right that it's a hockey trade. You've got Jacob Bernard Docker going back to Buffalo. Reminds me of the Henry Jokiharju acquisition. I think that's kind of a like for like swap, because they did move on from Jokiharju as well to Florida. We'll talk about that after. But James, I know that, like you said, the big boy's the next one. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. This one, there was a lot of talk about it. Aiden and I didn't really want to touch on it on our last pod, because the news flying around, nothing felt concrete yet. But Mikko Rantanen, after 13 games with the Carolina Hurricanes, they had just recently acquired him from the Colorado Avalanche. He is shipped to the Dallas Stars in exchange for Logan Stankoven, a first round pick in 2026, a first round pick in 2028, a third round pick in 2026, and a third rounder in 2027. Uh, that's a lot of assets, and that's one massive player going to the Dallas Stars.
Yeah.
And he's already sick there.
Yeah. Yeah, he's already got as many
He
goals.
immediately signs an 8-year, 12 million per deal with that team.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that could propel the Dallas Stars into perennial being a perennial contender because you've now
Propel
added.
them. Were they not already there?
Oh, when I say perennial, I mean like we're gonna have to deal with the Dallas Stars in the Western Conference Final for a Chicago Los Angeles type amount of time. So
Okay.
it's it's adding Rantanen to obviously the forward core that the Dallas Stars already have, but the fact that the fact that Dallas was able to acquire Rantanen and not move Rupe Hintz or Jason Robertson or Wyatt Johnston or any other number of players you can name, even on the back end. Because Carolina's a win now team. They would have absolutely loved to get better on the defense core with a guy maybe like Thomas Harley, better up front. Like I said, guys like Roberts and Johnston. Instead, they part with Logan Stankoven, who is has a lot of upside, is probably going to be missed by this team. But if you take a look at the most valuable forwards, the most valuable pieces on Dallas, the fact that they realistically didn't have to go anywhere near their top five most valuable assets to trade for a top three winger in the NHL on his day, like that's massively impressive. And not only that, it again feels like the kind of move that again, you combine this with what is already in Dallas. You combine this with a healthy Miro Heiskanen, hopefully sooner than later, and it could be the Stars once more
Am I
in
the
the
only
thick
one
of it.
who was surprised Maverick Bork wasn't also in the deal?
Yeah, honestly, because we heard that Dallas was willing and listening to calls on him.
Like, I mean, say maybe you take out the two third rounders and I mean Dallas adds like a fourth,
Yeah, maybe.
toss Maverick Bork in there, but regardless, massive deal. Logan Stankoven already scoring a goal with the Carolina Hurricanes. Mikko Rantanen already flying high with the Dallas Stars. Very exciting. Very, very, very exciting. We will dive further into all the ins and outs and drama around this deal. Um, Aiden, I mean, we could talk about a little bit of it now. It's already come out that um, Mitch Marner declined to waive his no move clause in Toronto to get basically swapped with Mikko Rantanen. We know that Rantanen wouldn't go sign with the Oilers, and they had a package ready to go for Rantanen. I mean, who knows what else? There could have been so much more on the table that we don't know anything about.
Well, we already heard that Mikko Rantanen had apparently told the Carolina Hurricanes when he got there that there was, quote, four teams he'd signed for, and they were not one of them.
Oh, Aiden, that's actually been contradicted by his agent today, saying Rod Brindamore was very misinformed. That's not true.
Okay. Interesting. I'm glad it was cleared up because that was straight out of Brenda Moore's mouth, right? Like
Yeah.
there was no like oh he said it in a scrum or it was misquoted. Like he made that statement loud and clear. Um so regardless though, James, like the understanding was that Carolina were in a bind, right? And I think that's kind of the answer to the question, where was Maverick Bork in this deal? It was a matter of leverage, right? And I think Dallas knew that Carolina didn't have as much as they did, and that might have been the best offer with or without Bork.
as per Elliot Friedman and a handful of other people, we've already seen that there were reworked versions of the deal. If Rantanen wouldn't agree to an extension with anyone, Dallas would have paid a significantly smaller package if there was no extension involved. Similarly with other teams. But yeah, time to move on from this one. I'm sure we're going to hear more drama around it in the coming months. But who knows? Maybe that drama ends with Rantanen hoisting the cup as a member of the Dallas Stars. Moving on though. Toronto Maple Leafs acquired center Scott Lawton, a fourth round pick in 2025 and a sixth round pick in 2027, in exchange for right winger Nikita Grabonkin, a conditional first rounder in 27, and the retention of half of Lawton's contract. Lawton has another year of term after this season, and Aiden, I have to say, this is the perfect piece in Toronto.
Yeah, if it wasn't going to be Braden Shen, I think, yeah, I think you said it. I think this is really good. Max Domi hadn't been what they needed him to be in the third line center spot, but I like Max Domi as an anywhere winger as well. So you get an upgrade on 3C and Lawton in there, and much like we already touched on with Yanni Gord going to Tampa Bay, even Trent Frederick going to Edmonton, these are guys that you win in the playoffs with. Scott Lawton is going to absolutely be a huge part of Toronto matching up and playing defense against the best the Atlantic Division is going to throw at them in these playoffs. And Lawton is a better guy to be doing it than Matthews too. Austin Matthews is their best defensive center. So for them to acquire an equally effective one, and of course, potentially take some of the burden off of Austin Matthews to be responsible for specific defensive assignments, I think that's huge as well.
Aiden, that wasn't the last of the Leafs moves that I think were crucial to the team's success in this highly competitive Atlantic division, but we'll get to the next ones later. Moving on. The Winnipeg Jets stay active in the trade market as well, acquiring just another character piece. Nothing big, no major splashes. They acquired Luke Schenn already. This time getting Brandon Tanev from the Seattle Kraken in exchange for a second round pick in 2027. Tanev, formerly a member of the Winnipeg Jets and formerly a part of a very, very effective bottom six and penalty killing unit. Aiden, do you think he fits seamlessly right back in?
I think so. Yeah, I think this is a great addition to Winnipeg's bottom six. You need those role players. He's a great penalty killer, and obviously, again, the playoffs are above everything else. They're a war of attrition. So a guy like Brandon Tanev to be able to slot in, he's a very smart hockey player. So I don't have much concern with him needing to fill in up or down the lineup, do anything they're going to ask him to do, which is a very valuable player once you start getting into the later rounds of the playoffs.
Next up, Aiden, back to my Colorado Avalanche. They stayed busy, very busy. In fact, I believe this is the most turned over team in the NHL this season. I can't recall exactly how many moves they've made, but the amount of players that have played for this team this year, just crazy, crazy to me. But this time making a deal with the Boston Bruins, acquiring, wow, I've totally been talking for far too long and far too fast. But acquiring center Charlie Coyle and a fifth round pick in 2026 in exchange for Casey Middlestat, left wing prospect William Zellers, and a second round pick in 2025. Aiden, I really like Charlie Coyle, but considering what the Avs gave up to get Middlestat and then these other two pieces, it feels like a lot to pay.
I agree. I'm looking at this trade and I'm saying to myself again, much in the same vein as talking about the Yanni Gord Oliver Bjorkstrand trade with Tampa Bay. This is a trade that I think 10 times out of 10, Boston will have won in three
Mm.
years if you're just looking at value. But Charlie Coyle is going to be so much more important to Colorado in a deep playoff run than Casey Middlestat would have been. And Middlestat's got all the
Yeah.
skill in the world, but Coyle's the guy you want in that situation. And so I know why you're saying that. Will Zellers is a guy that I'm quite high on as well. Second round picks also nothing to be trifled with, but I think this was a necessary move for Colorado to make as part of the all in push that they're obviously looking for here.
Definitely. Coyle now playing on a third line with Ross Colton, Yoel Kiviranta, Miles Wood potentially slotting back in on that line. Like Imagine having to play against a third line of Ross Colton, Charlie Coyle, and Miles Wood all the time. That's
Yeah,
quite frustrating. You're gonna get hit a lot,
yeah.
like almost too much. I wonder if they're gonna let the forecheck thing get away from them a bit. But regardless, player I'm excited to see there, and definitely a better fit than Middlestat. Unfortunately, Middlestat off to a hot start in Boston so far, and with the state of their roster, he is playing on that first power play unit. So definitely see him have some offensive success there in the near future. Moving forward, Luke Cunnin heading to the Columbus Blue Jackets in exchange for a fourth round pick going back to San Jose. San Jose did a very good job of moving all their little pieces. Like I don't really think there was anyone left behind, right?
No, not on guy, not in terms of guys that, didn't have longer term deals to stay that you would have been surprised to see them go. Like everybody you could have really guessed did end up being shipped.
Next up, Aiden, a trade I've heard mixed feelings about. This one being Peter Mrazek heading back to the Detroit Red Wings, along with forward Craig Smith. Joe Veleno heading the other way back to Chicago. Um, I've heard disappointment on this deal from both sides. I've heard Red Wings fans wishing that Joe Veleno got more of an opportunity and wishing that there was more time. But I mean, some people don't remember. I remember reading that Steve Yzerman went on a road trip with Joe Veleno, where they were in the car together and talking about the role in the NHL that he can have. To me, that's a pretty hands-on thing. And I mean, Steve Yzerman isn't the coach in Detroit; he's the general manager. But I mean, I feel like that means you're given a fair bit of a chance.
I agree.
Valletto being a guy who at one point was given exceptional status to play Major Junior a year early in Canada, and at one point he looked like a can't miss prospect. Peter Mrazek heading back to Detroit and hopefully shoring up the crease there. He's kind of been a diamond in the rough in Chicago at times over the past couple seasons. Do you think he shores up that Detroit crease enough that they can continue to make a playoff push?
I really don't see too much of it. Like Detroit's been a goalie carousel, right? Mrazek is
Yeah.
kind of unfortunately being caught up as the latest one. As far as the deal itself, though, like I really, really struggle to see how Chicago is thinking they they came away with anything but a winning lottery ticket here because like you said, Joe Veleno's still a guy with some upside. He's not going to be the can't miss exceptional status prospect, but James, every time I see this guy play, I think to myself that you know what, you take you take a little bit more seasoning, you put him with an experienced like third line center, a guy who's played that role in this league for a long time, he can totally develop into that. And so Chicago gets that for two guys that what I wouldn't have expected them to fetch even a third round pick for either, maybe if they were lucky. I'm taking that to the bank all day long.
Could agree with you more, man. I'm a big Valeno fan, always have been. I mean, he's definitely not the player I always thought he was going to be, but nothing wrong with that. The guy's already played almost 300 NHL games. That experience is valuable as well. That's valuable to a lot of young players that, like they're still finding their spot in this league. Chicago has a lot of vets and they have a lot of really young guys. They don't have a lot of players in that mid 20s range. Not anymore, at least. And I feel like that's definitely a valuable asset to add. But moving forward to our next deal, New Jersey acquiring center Cody Glass and prospect Jonathan Gruden in exchange for Chase Stillman, Max Graham, and a third round pick. Third round pick being the main piece going back to Pittsburgh, the other two mostly being contract fillers from all accounts. Cody Glass, that was just asset management as well. He is fitting in quite well in New Jersey already. I believe he had 2 assists tonight. Um, and according to Elliot Friedman, great guy, really great guy who is very excited to go to New Jersey. He was very excited to be in Pittsburgh. He was actually a little bit sad to go, but he's happy for the opportunity. And with Jack Hughes out of the lineup, plenty of opportunity there. Plenty, plenty, plenty. Cody Glass is a guy who fairly highly touted after being drafted early in the NHL and never really found his footing. Injuries have been a thing. Being in and out of the lineup has been a thing, but maybe New Jersey's the spot. Remains to be seen. Pittsburgh continues to pile up draft picks. Aiden, ready to move on to another big one?
Yeah.
All right. We're gonna have a couple big Boston deals in a row. And dude, they've been cleaning house. Before we dive into these, how do you feel if you are David Pastrnak or Charlie McAvoy or Jeremy Swayman for that matter?
That's a great question. I'm thinking that my future in that city is starting to be rethought. I think Boston's going to do whatever they can to build the franchise up around those guys so that they can still be competitive. But I also think they are only a year or two out from it becoming increasingly obvious that that is not going to happen. So I think the next 18 to 24 months for the Boston Bruins are gonna completely change whether we see Pasternak, McAvoy somewhere else by the end of these contracts, or if we're going to see Boston compete with those guys at their core again.
Now, listeners, I'm going to tell you guys why we're talking about this. We've talked about a couple Boston deals already, but these ones are big, especially if you're a member of that Bruins dressing room or a fan of the team whatsoever. This being Brad Marchand, captain of the Boston Bruins, Stanley Cup champ, nothing but a winner at all levels. Traded to the Florida Panthers in exchange for a conditional second round pick in 2027. 50% of Marchand's contract was retained. That second round pick becomes a first rounder if he plays, I believe it's a quarter of their games in the first two rounds and they win both those rounds. I
Yeah,
believe that's the condition.
it's something something convoluted that I had in my head boiled down to if he plays two rounds of the playoffs, right? Like if
More
they
or
play
less.
two rounds in the playoffs, more or less, that is that's the contingency there.
This next deal, next one on the list being the Bruins trading defenseman Brandon Carlo, who's been a mainstay on that blue line for quite a while. Very, very solid defenseman in all areas of the ice. He's not going to wow you offensively, but man, is he ever solid in transition in his own zone. Uh, Back the other way, Leafs prospect Fraser Minton is now a member of the Boston Bruins, as well as a top five protected first round pick in 2026, a fourth rounder in 25, and the Bruins are retaining 50% of Carlo's contract. While that may not seem all that important, Aiden, does Carlo not have 2 years left on his deal after this season?
Brandon Carlo as a Bruin, yeah, 2026, 27, his contract's going to expire. So you're absolutely right that uh, the 50% here, I think, is actually where it propels the package to be as strong as it is. Because the way I look at this, like Fraser Minton is a recent enough first round, or sorry, not first rounder, a recent enough a second round pick that I'm looking at him as a as another somewhat high value piece of this trade, and it feels a little bit like Minton and the first was a lot to give up for a defenseman who really is having a bad year in Boston. And I'm not going to pin that on him because it's been a very tumultuous season in Boston as a whole, but Carlo has not been the player that he was there in the past. So this is a package that I'm looking at and saying to myself, this is totally fair value for Brandon Carlo at his best, and it will look fair value if Brandon Carlo returns there with Toronto. But Carlo so far this year hasn't been as good as I would have expected him to be for sure.
Honestly, I think that's mob mentality. I think the Bruins have sucked and he's sucked as a result. That's my thought.
Could have been.
Another blue liner on the move, and this one making my heart happy, Aiden. This trade is one of those ones where you go, damn, this is really cool, especially once you hear the whole story. Eric Johnson reacquired by the Colorado Avalanche in exchange for right winger Giovanni Smith. Uh, Johnson was acquired originally by the Avs in the 2010-2011 season. He played for them for 11, 12 seasons. Nicknamed the Condor, the guy was beloved in Colorado. He eventually ended up playing at Buffalo, Philadelphia, right after, as his game kind of declined and the Avs moved on. Apparently, Flyers GM Danny Briere went to Eric Johnson. This is as per Elliot Friedman, and asked him if he would want to go back. And they worked on it. They got the deal done. And Aiden, this wasn't something that Briere and Flyers brass had to do. This isn't something that everyone just goes, oh, well, would you like to go here? Let's send you there. No, no, no. This is going out of your way to make a deal happen on one of the busier days of the year. So kudos to them. And I'm very, very happy for Erik Johnson to come back to the city he won a cup in. Definitely. Moving on to another fairly big deal. This one definitely caught me off guard. Aiden, this is the Ottawa Senators acquiring forward Fabian Zetterlund, who has had a very, very solid season. Fairly versatile player as well. Center Tristan Robbins and a fourth round pick. The San Jose Sharks in exchange acquiring forward Noah Gregor, who I believe was originally a Shark. Yeah, yeah, he was part of a trade over to Ottawa before, I believe. But as well as prospect Zacho Stopchuk, who we've talked about on this podcast, and a second round pick in 2025. Aiden, can you break this deal down and tell listeners what they're seeing? Because while these are names who are super familiar to us, I don't believe they're household names for everyone.
I love this for Ottawa. Fabian Zetterlund is somebody easily 30 goal upside on this guy. 25-year-old from Sweden who has been filling the net for the San Jose Sharks in the last season and a half. He was part of the return
And
that
he
San
hits
Jose,
everything.
and he does hit everything that moves. Yeah. He was part of the return that San Jose got from New Jersey as part of the trade that sent Timo Meyer to the Devils. San Jose have a lot of guys like Zetterlund because unfortunately Zetterlund doesn't do a lot outside of what you see pop up on the stats and as James mentioned the hits. He's not all that good in his own zone. He's not all that good off the puck in his own zone. You need him to be in my opinion, you need him to be in a top 6 role. And as the San Jose Sharks continue to improve, it looked less and less likely that he was going to factor in to their top 6 long term. So they go and they swap him for 21-year-old Zacho Stopchuk. And this is a guy who San Jose, I guarantee you right now, are looking at and they're saying, we are going to love to have you in our bottom 6 long term. Fabian Zetterlund was never going to be that player. He was never going to be the guy to play below William Eklund and Macklin Celebrini in the lineup. He was either going to be up in that top 6 or he wasn't going to be a very effective piece of this team. Ostapchuk's a guy who you put him in the bottom 6 and he can play that grind game. He can play on the PK. He's a big body at 6'4", and he's somebody who still has upside. He was a 39th overall pick by Ottawa in 2021. Had his last season with splitting time between the Vancouver Giants and the Winnipeg Ice in the WHL. He scored 31 goals, two-time World Junior gold medalist with Canada. So for San Jose, I think this is fantastic business to move on from a guy that they didn't project to be in their top 6 long term. For Ottawa, it's great as well because you're trading a couple guys that may or may not have factored into your future in exchange for somebody with easily top 6 upside. I could totally see Zetterlund just absolutely lighting it up on a line potentially with like a Dylan Cousins and a Brady Tkachuk, right? He's kind of Victor Olofsson-y in that you put him as a passenger on the right line and he can just fill the net.
Very, very, very nice breakdown, Aiden. Love to hear it. And you know what? Senators fans are going to want to see this. This is the kind of move that, I mean, in addition to the Dylan Cousins trade, this is management really caring about the team's success. The team is 35, 25, and 5 after tonight's win against the Philadelphia Flyers. That puts them, damn, they're in a first wild card spot. Only 5 points behind the Tampa Bay Lightning. Not even bad. Not bad at all. Like they're thick in the fight. They're 5 points away from missing playoffs. Aiden, can you remember a time in the last, what, 4 or 5 years where they were in that spot? I don't.
No, it's been pretty much since 2017, since Chris Kunitz ended all their hopes and dreams that this Ottawa team has had as much upside as we're seeing out of them this season. I think the moves are moves overall that this team needed to make going into the playoffs. Dylan Cousins has thrown his weight around like crazy since he's got to Ottawa. You want to talk hitting everything that moves. You're getting Zetterlund and Cousins in there, and that is significantly more physicality into that top 6 than you were having from Josh Norris, period.
Well, time to move on from this one. We have a handful of small moves that we can touch base on. Buffalo acquiring defenseman Eric Bronstrom from the New York Rangers in exchange for forward Nicholas Aube-Kubel. Um, I really liked Nicholas Aube-Kubel in Colorado during that cup run. he was really solid that year. And dude, what has been going on since then? He can't find his footing with any other teams.
Yeah, he's a great skater, and I think that's where I would want him on my team, just because anytime you get a guy who can blaze up and down the ice like Abe Kubel can, it's just about finding the right fit, right? Like he's not a play driver, but he's got an effective enough skill set that I think it's eh, he's gonna fit in well on the fourth line with a couple more guys that can match his pace.
Definitely, and I feel like the Rangers have a team that he could really fit in with. When you look at how their bottom six attacks on the forecheck, that is a system he could work with. Hopefully, this is the one. It didn't really work out in Buffalo. No reason to say it won't work out with the next team. Next up, New Jersey Devils acquiring Daniel Sprong from the Seattle Kraken in exchange for a seventh round pick in 26. And Aiden, it feels like Sprong was a depreciating asset after a couple years ago, really impressing in Seattle.
Yeah, it's been going downhill, and unfortunately, for the same reason that I talked about, San Jose wanting to move on from Fabian Zetterlund, except for Sprong, it's unfortunately significantly more of a problem, right? Like he's a very, very one-dimensional player, and so unless he's going to fill the net with a lot of goals, you're going to see him struggle to maintain a frequent NHL position because you need to do more than just that. And so Sprong, I think, is destined to kind of be the guy that's going to bounce around and be the 13th forward in some places. Because if he's the 13th forward, and obviously you have, like I said, playoffs are a war of attrition. Guys go down in the playoffs. You need somebody to fill in on the second power play unit, or just jump up to ride shotgun on a top six line. He's the kind of guy that can do that for New Jersey, and that's going to be, I think, the most that his role ends up being there.
And you know what? That's a role that sometimes needs filling on that team. So maybe that works out for him. Devils going for another depth addition, adding defenseman Dennis Cholowski. In exchange, Adam Beckman going back to the New York Islanders. Dennis Cholowski at one time in my eyes was a fairly solid depth defenseman. And I remember having really, really high hopes for him at times. Beckman, his name sounds familiar to me. Aiden, do you know anything about Adam Beckman?
Yeah, this isn't the first time I think we've seen Adam Beckman get moved in the NHL. He's a depth player who we saw go from Minnesota to New Jersey. He was a prospect in New Jersey, and when he was a prospect in New Jersey, he was scoring at a decent clip with the Iowa Wild. He got moved in another minor league swap last June, so that's probably where you would have seen the name
Right.
come up. Is this is his second trade now, and in a similar deal, it was traded for Graham Clark, who was a 23-year-old right winger. So just again, minor league player swap, nothing really more to it.
Next up, Carolina Hurricanes adding center Mark Jankowski from the Nashville Predators in exchange for a fifth round pick in 2026. Jankowski fitting in very, very well so far, getting a couple points already and supposedly earning the trust of his teammates. I saw a couple post game interviews saying how much they liked having him there already. So, for a guy who's been tossed around quite a bit in the past half decade, I feel like this is music to his ears. I feel like this is very, very nice for him. And Aiden, can you think of a better system than the one Carolina Hurricanes roll for Mark Jankowski?
No, it's kind of if you were gonna picture the Rod Brindamore fourth line center, it was gonna be Mark Jankowski, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is the same Mark Jankowski that was a projected fourth or fifth round pick and the Calgary Flames way back in I want to say 2012. Yeah, 2013. Yeah, they picked him somewhere around 20 in the first round.
21.
Aiden's doing something with his fingers. Yeah, somewhere around 20. Yeah,
Yeah,
21. Okay,
21.
yeah. Yeah. By the way, that whole time Aiden was finger motioning me, using one hand, just holding up fingers, going, yeah, this is two fingers up, that's a two. Yep, that's a one finger up, that's a one. That's the time. And honestly, I think I had it, but his fingers going up in the air made me even more confused. Because if you guys can't tell, and I know this is in no way complaining because we're talking on a podcast about hockey for fun. It's actually quite difficult to keep your brain moving without bobbling everything when you're when every sentence is filled with so many numbers and years for draft picks and then names. And not all of these names are easy to pronounce for most people. I mean, I have an easy time with it just because I'm hockey obsessed, but man, my my tongue is like trying to tie itself in a knot. Aiden, how are you feeling after this one?
Sorry, I wasn't expecting a reference to your tongue there. It just kind of caught me off guard. But, yeah,
Cat got your
well,
tongue?
we've done a lot of talking here, James, and I guess now really it's time for winners and losers because,
Oh,
um,
hold on. We're not done yet. We're not
oh,
done yet. We had a couple small ones. The Pittsburgh Penguins acquiring defenseman Connor Timmins and center Connor Dewar from the Toronto Maple Leafs in exchange for a fifth round pick. That's the Penguins refilling those spots after they've moved on from a few guys. And you know, I've always been a big Connor Timmins fan. I've always really liked Connor Dewar. Those are a couple character guys with very high drive that are heading over to the Penguins. And from what I keep hearing and reading, everyone is loving playing for the Penguins this season, even when they're not playing well. So, I mean, it's decently young guys. Maybe they fit. Maybe they take a step forward. Only time will tell. Boston acquiring defenseman Henry Jokiharju. That's filling the Brandon Carlos spot. A fourth round pick in 2026, heading back to Buffalo. Uh, New Jersey staying busy acquiring center Mark McLaughlin. See, this isn't super easy. Maybe I'm just bad at it. From the Boston Bruins in exchange for defenseman Daniil Mizul, who I will fully admit I've never heard of. The Toronto Maple Leafs acquiring center Reese Johnson from the Minnesota Wild in exchange for future considerations. And Aiden, the final trade we are going to mention. This is the fifth from the last on the list to go through before the deadline, but I will say probably the silliest one. Aiden, did you think that on the 2025 NHL trade deadline, Shea Weber was going to get traded to the Chicago Blackhawks?
Connor Bedard has had multiple future Hall of Famers be on Chicago's payroll at the same time as him without ever playing with any of them, which is
Yep.
funny. Yeah, that's all there is to it. It's money. It's money being moved.
Yep.
It's just money.
Uh, Utah Hockey Club getting a fifth round pick in 2026 in exchange for forward Aku Ratu, former first round pick defenseman Victor Soderstrom, and then Shea Weber's contract. With that Shea Weber contract, they can LTIR stash it. They can make a little bit of money appear from nowhere. They can use it to get to the cap floor. It is fully up to them. They kind of have but they can't make him play. He has not been cleared. And by the way, if anyone ever doubted whether or not Shea Weber is healthy enough to play, he gets checkups every year. He can't play.
I saw him in Kelowna a couple summers ago. I didn't like bother him. He was like going through a Starbucks, so I left him alone, but I did
What was
see
his
him.
Starbucks order?
I did not. I didn't see. I was working. I was working actually, like in the Starbucks in Kelowna because I was. It was a work day that I was just working there.
See, this is what I would care about. I wouldn't go and bug him, but I would walk past him just close enough to see if he's getting a dirty chai latte or if he's getting like a nice shaken espresso, or maybe he's just a straight cold brew, no creamer, no sugar, no nothing kind of guy. He seems like he could be that kind of guy. But then what if he's getting a pink drink?
Okay,
He could be
so
ripping a pink drink.
listen, man, we're a couple BC boys, all right? Shea Weber, likewise. So we ever get Shea Weber on this podcast, you can ask him what his Starbucks order is, all right? I'll ask him about his Olympic experience, and you can ask him. You can ask him that.
You know what? One of those is going to be more interesting than the other, and I think we all know the answer to that.
I want to hear about that 2010 quarterfinal against Russia. Like that's the game that all those guys that showed up in that game, I want to hear about that game.
Yes, yes, that would be a ton of fun. A story that I feel like we haven't heard told in its entirety just yet. But Aiden, you want to go to winners and losers, but before that, what players did you think were going to get moved that didn't get flipped?
So are you gonna make me do this now? Because I didn't know when I was gonna spout off about Vancouver, but this feels like you're giving me a segue to spout off
Well,
about
yeah,
Vancouver.
because very clearly there is a right winger on the Vancouver Canucks that you're going to start this list off with.
Yeah, Brock Besser, It's one of the stupidest, and again, it's such a high bar in Vancouver over the last 15 years, but it's got to be one of the stupidest pieces of asset management from the Vancouver Canucks that I've seen in a long time. Vancouver and Brock Besser are nowhere near each other on a contract extension. Not to mention that if Vancouver were to give Brock Besser an 8-year contract, James, he would like eventually be Tanner Pearson. All right. I'm a big Brock Besser fan, but his skating has never been at enough of a level to have faith that he can be an effective NHLer as it slows down. He's already 28 years old. He's got one 40-goal season under his belt. I do not in any way, shape, or form want to commit $8 million to this guy for 8 years. That's what it seems like it would take to re-sign him. So why wouldn't the Vancouver Canucks just move on? Well, apparently, according to Rick Dhaliwal, it's because it is extremely important for the Vancouver Canucks owner Francesco Aquilini to make the playoffs this year. So what that means in real people language is Vancouver's owner interfered with management enough to prevent them from selling at the deadline on two players, Brock Besser and Pius Suter, that are both not going to re-sign with the team and will eventually walk for nothing, so that his team can get absolutely rinsed by Winnipeg or Vegas in the first round, and Rogers Arena can host two of those playoff games, get the gate revenue from those games, and then be out of the playoffs. And that's even if they make it there. I am so mad, James, because this was so stupid.
I think Brock Besser is going to make a great San Jose Shark or Anaheim Duck in free agency and score 10 goals against the Canucks this season.
Yeah, that's what happened with Tyler Toffoli too. Um, when he went to Montreal in that Canadian division year. Yeah, there was no reason not to move the guy. All right, like look at Anthony Beauvillier fetched a second round pick. Like, come on, be real, right? And Patrick Levine tried to spin it in like, oh, you wouldn't have liked the offers we got, but it was so obviously saving face. And James, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Like, I think if I see Francesco Aquilini be the owner of the Vancouver Canucks for the rest of my life, that means I'm never going to see the Vancouver Canucks win a Stanley Cup for the rest of my life because he skews the priorities of this franchise to unbelievable degrees because there is no reason whatsoever thinking in any any success outside of just getting to the playoffs this year. If you put any stock whatsoever in anything beyond that, you are moving him, you're moving Pia Suter, and you're not hanging on to these guys as self rentals so you can get rinsed in the first round by whoever you play.
You ever thought about finding a new team? I don't even think you like the Canucks.
Dude, I mean, I'm a loyal person, man. That's all I got.
But do you have to be? I feel like this Canucks team has caused you more pain than happiness in the time I've known you.
I feel like there's not a
No,
lot of
in your
Canucks
whole life.
fans.
In your whole life.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah.
Like
Time you've
like
known
there's
me.
there's a certain positivity factor that lacks in the Canucks fandom. Like when the Avs were setting records for being the worst team in the modern era, they were still selling games out somewhat consistently, and comment sections were filled with, I really like the play of this 19-year-old this season, and I could see him being the kind of guy who's useful later on. And like media would still be like, go get him, Matt Duchene, and fist bump him. Like, you know what I mean? It's
James,
it's the kind of thing where there's just positivity.
I want nothing more than to be able to do that in Vancouver. But again, it's not that for two reasons. Number one, they've never committed to a direction, right? It's just been it's been sputtering mediocrity. It was barely a rebuild. They would never commit to a rebuild. They never got enough of the high-end talent that they needed. And now they're in a position where this group clearly is not working anymore. And it is ownership who is interfering with objectively the right decisions being made. So you're kind of referencing Colorado. Personally, man, if Vancouver right now was or Vancouver ever was as, clear and obvious about their direction as Colorado in those years, guess what, James? Those years in Colorado won them the 2022 Stanley Cup. So, yeah, when Vancouver's bad enough to get Nathan MacKinnon in the NHL draft, then I'm going to be a lot happier with the direction of the franchise because that's how you win Stanley Cups.
I think like I think there's got to be a benchmark where if at a certain year, a certain amount of years into this podcast, if the Vancouver Canucks don't make you happy, you have to find a new team.
It's good.
Is that
That's
is that a
hard.
pact you're willing to make if we
I,
workshop it?
I don't know. Yeah, it might need to be like it might need to be a more in depth proposition than that. But yeah,
Okay, all right. I'm gonna come back to this one next pod, and I'm gonna make you an offer.
the playoffs last year were
We're gonna
fun,
start
dude.
treating you like you're a fan free agent. That's what we're gonna do. Maybe the Islanders are interested in your rights.
Dude, yeah, honestly, you know what it should be? It should be one of like the least reported on teams, so I can try and like corner the market of like reporting on that team for those fans. If I was smart, that's what I would do.
Oh yeah, yeah, it would be a ton of fun too. You would be uh 3 years ago Chris Faber with the Abbey Canucks.
Yeah, and by the way, Chris Faber, man, talk about a guy who's earned every inch
Yeah,
of what he's earned. Hey, he's a local
very cool
sports
guy.
writer in Vancouver, and he's personification of a good dude. And it's no surprise to anybody that has done any work with him whatsoever that he is where he is. So shout out Chris Faber, impromptu.
Definitely. Yeah, how have we never shouted out Fabes?
Well, and talking about Canucks and talking about Canucks on a podcast, it was Canucks conversation with Faber and David Quadrelli. That was one of the, if not the best Canucks podcast for a long time too.
Did you know I randomly went up to one of my buddy's buildings to watch a UFC fight and I went to buzz in and it said David Quadrelli, like 5 names below his, and I was like, "Oh, I know who that is." And I kept scrolling. That's right, David Quadrelli. I know where you live. Or lived like some 3, 4 years ago, whatever it was. But yeah,
Don't.
moving on. Another couple players that I thought probably very well could have been moved or should have been moved, but didn't. I'm going to head over to Nashville. I definitely thought Ryan O'Reilly would have been a highly touted player on a lot of people's lists. I mean, contrary to how I felt about Braden Shen, there were a lot of Braden Shen rumors. Some of them even saying he could. There were teams looking at adding both Shen brothers. Winnipeg Jets ended up with Luke. Braden ends up staying put in St. Louis. I never really thought Braden Shen was getting moved. Captain of the Blues. He's a Armstrong style player. He is a personification of that organization. But Ryan O'Reilly, I definitely thought he was a guy who could be on the move. Wears an A in Nashville. He is pretty damn well their first line center. Had a great season last year. Has looked solid at times this year. He still has a lot of gas left in the tank, even at age 34. And for what he brings to the table at 4.5 million per for 2 seasons, come on. Come on. If you're a contender, you can't tell me you don't want Ryan O'Reilly to play on your second or third line.
Yeah, I wonder how high that cost of acquisition is, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's still early in Barry Trotz's GM career. We don't know how shrewd he is. We don't know how stingy he is. Maybe he demanded a very high price. Eric Carlson was a name that got tossed around quite a bit, but Aiden and I both agreed that this was an off-season move. This was always going to be an off-season move if it happens. If the Pittsburgh Penguins are shipping him out, it wasn't going to be at the deadline. Too complicated. Um, hmm. Aiden, anyone else? Anyone else on your mind?
No, I don't think so. Braden Shen, like the one you mentioned, I think I agree that I would have been a little bit surprised to see him go, but I would have been significantly less surprised to see him go than I was to see Brad Marchand go, just as an example.
Definitely, man, definitely. One other thing I'm kind of curious about is, with all those Boston Bruins moves that we talked about, who is the next to go in the offseason? I think you're looking at a Pavel Zacha, maybe like a Hampus Lindholm, something of the kind. That Lindholm deal would be kind of hard to move, but I don't doubt that there will be more players in that Bruins organization on the move.
I agree.
They are
Yeah.
kind of limited. They have a lot of term locked up to Pasternak, McAvoy, Swayman, Zadorov, and Elias Lindholm and Hampus Lindholm. But I mean, there are other guys in the organization who could definitely be moved. So only time will tell. Aiden, winners and losers. Give me a winner and a loser, and I'll do the same.
Winner's Dallas because the cost of acquisition on Mikko Rantanen was on it like pennies on the dollar of what this guy brings, especially when you then consider that he turns around and signs a contract that's going to age well. Like $12 million was less than what Colorado were being asked to pay for him. Um, Now that money might go farther for Rantanen in Dallas than it would have in Colorado. Like who knows what the take home is? Taxes are different in every state, and they're going to change over the next 8 years that Rantanen is, of course, signed in Dallas. But you give up two first round picks that, from the look of this Dallas Stars team, are both going to be in the mid to late 20s at best. And you give up one of your very good young players. I really like Logan Stankoven, but he was not Wyatt Johnston and he wasn't Jason Robertson or Thomas Harley. And the fact you, again, we talked about this as well. The fact you only need to give up one of them. Maverick Bork wasn't somebody that needed to be involved. I think that's big for Dallas as well. Not to say that Carolina was a massive loser in that trade specifically. The whole situation was just impossible, really, for them to traverse. It was almost a no-winner by that point.
A winner, I'm gonna go Colorado Avalanche, man. I know I recognize my bias here, but this is a team who has, by all accounts, made more significant trades than any other team in the league this season. I say significant trades because I counted out 4 or 5 New Jersey Devils and San Jose Sharks trades each that have little to no impact on the league at this current point in time. But dude, the Avs have totally reshaped their roster. The goalie tandem swap around earlier in the season, the Nelson and Coyle and Drury ads, basically cementing their second, third, and fourth line center for the remainder of the season and playoffs. Can you remember another time in NHL history that a team replaced centers 2, 3, and 4 on their team? Because I sure don't.
Not off the top of my head for sure. And I think they did a great job too. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I truly do.
Yeah,
Like,
and like
awesome.
aside from all of the incredibly useful on ice additions, Eric Johnson's going to be a seventh defenseman on that team. But dude, his impact in the locker room and at practice with all of those guys that won a cup with him and played with him long term, that's nothing to shake a stick at. That is an amazing addition. That is a morale addition. That's a team addition. That's something where guys are going to be excited just to come to the locker room and see him. Guys are going to be excited to come to practice and see him in the trainer's room. It's very cool for a guy to be able to close out his career with the team he spent the most time with. Uh, a loser at the deadline, man. Sometimes I hate throwing this out. I really, really, really hate just like throwing the shade around. And to me, though, my loser is the LA Kings. I think the LA Kings had the potential to make some serious noise in this year's playoffs. They still do. They are, in my eyes, one of the more underrated teams in the league this year. And you know what? Everyone's been saying it for years that, maybe this is the year the Kings could beat the Oilers in playoffs. I still think it's possible. I've thought it's possible damn near every year, other than that one year they just got completely wiped. I think they've lost against the Oilers 3 years in a row in playoffs now. Yeah, three. Am I right there? Yeah, okay. Yeah, three. And you know what? They really want to stop this from being a fourth in a row. Is Andrei Kuzmenko the one player who's going to solve that? No. Did I think they were going to add Brock Besser? Yeah. Yeah, I did. I thought Brock Besser was going to be an LA King after the deadline. That didn't happen. I also thought they were one of the teams with the biggest potential to make one of those shocker hockey trades, those 1-for-1s or 2-for-2s that completely blow you away and you don't expect the player. I didn't know who they were going to go after, and from some of the things I've read online, not all of them sourced, some of them sourced. The Kings were working on quite a bit. None of it came to fruition, though. I don't know if that was due to price. I don't know if that was due to availability, cap constraints, whatever it may be, but some things they were working on did not work out. And you know what? It doesn't always work out. It's called a trade deadline for a reason. You had homework deadlines growing up. You didn't always meet them, or at least if you were anything like me, you didn't always meet them. Maybe you're perfect. I don't know. But I digress. I really, really wanted the LA Kings to make some noise on the trade front. Make a big addition. I think the blue line's fine. I think your forwards are great. I think goaltending is overachieved and is continuing to do so, but it is everything you need it to be. But I don't think everything you need it to be anywhere on the ice for your whole roster is going to win the cup. I think they really, really missed the boat here. I don't know what they should have added. In my eyes, probably a top six forward, but yeah. Aiden, what do you think? Do you think the Kings have missed the boat here? Am I way off?
No, I like what you said, and honestly, yeah, you're right that Brock Besser's kind of the better version of Andrei Kuzmenko they could have acquired, right? In a lot of different ways. Who knows what that cost of acquisition was on Besser? Don't think we're gonna get an honest answer on that from anybody. Uh, yeah, I think a little bit of missing the boat on the Kings' part. But I think in retrospect, obviously it's going to depend on whether they beat or they lose to the Oilers. But the other thing that they didn't do that I think a lot of teams did is they did not make a move that in 3 years we're going to look back on and say, holy, that was bad. Because in such a
That's true.
seller's market, there is something to be said for just holding pat. Because no matter what, no matter who they went after, the strong likelihood was just that they were going to have to pay above what whoever the player they got should have been valued at. So, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I also think that a team refusing to buy is more stomachable right now than a team refusing to sell because of the nature of the trade market. And with that being said, Vancouver is obviously my big loser because there is no way that Pia Suter and Brock Besser don't get a worthwhile return when you look at what other players went for.
Totally. In one team I'm on the fence about, that is the Winnipeg Jets. Very, very, very competitive Central Division this year. They will be having to face some wild card opponent in the first round, most likely. Colorado and Dallas going to head in the first round. But Aiden, they added Brandon Tanev and Luke Shen, character guys, really great depth guys, amazing role players, people who are you going to want. You're going to want to go to war with them. But I'm not smack talking Vladislav Nemesnikov. But is that really a second line center on a cup winning team? Yes, I do remember some of the centers Chicago rolled out on their second line during their dynasty years, but Patrick Kane also played on that line. So I don't really see this being the same thing in Winnipeg. I think their goaltending is a big position of strength. If Hellebuck can make it work in big games, I think their defense is a big position of strength. I think there's a lot of underrated guys on that blue line, and Josh Morrissey is one hell of a player. I think they have some elite guys up front, Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor having amazing seasons, Nikolai Ehlers as well. But dude, are they really gonna win a playoff round without adding a big forward? I don't think they are. I think Winnipeg has massive upset written all over them.
I can see that. I can definitely see the perspective you're coming from there, especially, yeah, like you said, this is a lot of Winnipeg Jets players who have been in this position before and failed to deliver. I understand what you're saying about Vladislav Nemesnikov. Adam Lowry often gets run as the second line center. Vladislav Nemesnikov is playing right now with Nikolai Ehlers and Cole Perfetti, who are both having unbelievable seasons. This is a version of Gabriel Velarde we've never seen before. This is a version of Kyle Connor, even, that we've never seen before. This forward core is so deep that Alex Iafallo, who I believe has scored 25 goals in this league, James, is on the fourth line.
Yep.
And you've
Yep.
Like I think it's defense that I would have actually rather seen them upgrade than a centerman. If it had to be one or the other, I would
Fine
have
with that. Yeah.
probably, yeah, I would have probably done, I would have probably done something. I'm completely agreeing with you. I'm just saying it's the dual factor of number one, the way this forward core rolls out, like having Perfetti and Ehlers on a line, and then that Lowry line underneath Connor, Scheifele, and Velarde, like it works as a top nine, right? It does work very well. Um, but with that being said, it's Winnipeg not doing what again they are going to be criticized for not doing if they fail, right? Like, and that's as simple as that. As simple as that.
Could you imagine if Winnipeg goes into the first round and Connor Hellebuck loses a goalie battle with Calgary Flames goalie Dustin Wolf?
Yeah, God, dude, could you imagine
I
Dustin
can't
Wolf?
imagine. That's the problem.
Dustin Wolf
I can't imagine this happening.
Dustin Wolf would play himself like into the Olympics, I think, for next year if that happens.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Like no contest, definitely. Aiden, I think we wrap up our trade deadline talk. Um, there's a handful of news we could get to. There are certain things we can stretch on till later. One thing I want to touch on, by the way, sorry listeners, we didn't get to an episode last week. Aiden and I both ran into some time constraints. Got busy, life happens, but we're here now. One thing I wanted to talk about last week though, Mark Scheifele is now the Jets slash Thrashers franchise all-time leader in goals. Where, Aiden, does he stand on their all-time franchise best players list? You're thinking of guys like Ilya Kovalchuk, Danny Heatley, Marian Hossa, Dustin Bufflin, Andrew Ladd's a big guy in there. Um, I feel like the list runs dry not long after that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to make a determination right now, especially when you've obviously thrown out names like Kovalchuk. He's the best Jet of all time by the time he's done, though, right? Like he's the best player in franchise history by the time he's done. And I think even just like you go back to the fact that he put on a jersey in his draft year that said NHL across the front of it. That's how he
Yeah.
predated the Winnipeg Jets jersey and logo. That's how long he's been with this organization. I think there's absolutely something to be said for the longevity of that, right? So whether he does end up retiring a Jet or he goes off like Jerome McGinley did from Calgary and looks to compete somewhere else, he finishes as the best player in franchise history for sure.
Very fun. Love to see it. Also, briefly touching on it, Kirby Dack done for the season due to injury. Very unfortunate. This is not a guy who we want to see get injured again. He's missed a lot of games over the last handful of years, stretching back to that time he broke, I believe, his wrist at the World Junior Hockey Championship. Very much hoping that he finds his footing again next season because Aiden, this just keeps happening. It's quite unfortunate. Another name done for the year and playoffs, that being Jack Hughes, dynamic superstar center, out for the season after fairly ugly looking collision. Aiden, I believe it was his shoulder, right?
Yes, just barreled into the end boards after getting upended on a back check.
Yeah, quite unfortunate. I remember it being fairly ugly to look at, and that's just a shocker for him, that Devils team, and everyone who's a fan of him. The player's a lot of fun to watch, and it's a shame we won't be seeing him in playoffs this year. Next up, Alex Ovechkin, Aiden. He's what, 9 goals away now?
Yeah, popped another empty netter the other day. Washington games should be can't miss TV right now. All right. Every single time we talk about it, we say the same thing, but it's a force of nature who is willing his way over the finish line here, and it's incredible to see. And the fact of the matter being, it's going to be pretty hard to beat. But the way the Washington Capitals are looking right now, Ovechkin breaking the record, who knows if it's the most memorable part of the season for the Washington Capitals? Who knows what's
Ooh,
in front of this
I
team,
like
right?
that.
like I think the Metropolitan Division's wide open. Like Washington, I could see easily
Yep.
ending up basically being like kind of like Florida was a couple years ago, when they lost to Vegas in the final, where it's a run that maybe you don't expect, but once you start see them in the playoffs, once you start seeing them rolling, once you start seeing exactly what that goaltending can do when it's hot, you see the vision and you see how playoff rounds can get won by that group.
Yeah, Logan Thompson is 27, 4, and 5 as a member of the Washington Capitals. Is that good? Yeah, obviously. Also, I mean, it's not just Alex Ovechkin filling the net this season. Dylan Strome up to 64 points in 65 games now. Alexei Protas up to 56 in 65. Pierre-Luc Dubois up to 56 in 65. Tom Wilson 53 in 64. Almost 30 goals there. Connor McMichael, Alex Ovechkin, both with 50 points. Ovi being over a point per game. John Carlson and Jacob Chychrun both looking like they'll near 60 points. Um, Everything has been very impressive, Aiden. All of their depth guys contributing. Like this is a very, very fun team.
I totally agree with you. It's coming together for this Washington group. And by the way, really quickly, did you expect Darcy Kemper for Pierre-Luc Dubois to be win-win so fast?
I thought there was definitely going to be a loser here, and I didn't know who it was going to be. I didn't really care who it was going to be because I felt like they were both bad situations at the time, but it being win-win is awesome. Can you imagine how one guy feels when it's a win on one end and a lose on the other end, and you're the player that's making it be a loss? That's unfortunate. Like if Dubois went to Washington and was unreal, and then Kemper couldn't find his game in LA, that's probably gonna hurt. But they've
Yeah.
both been nasty, man. They've both been so good. Like I those are two teams that I love watching right now, and both those players are a big part of it. Um, in next episode, I want to get back to trivia. I think our listeners want to hear it too.
Yeah, you are probably a little bit more creative in the game side, but we've got some more fun to do for sure. Once we're a little bit more together for the springtime too, I'm really hoping we get some really cool interviews coming up ahead of the NHL draft. Hoping
Hmm.
uh hoping we for the second year in a row manage to secure an interview with an NHL draft prospect, somebody that's going to get their name called this summer, as well as bringing back our scout Jeremy Plord for our third consecutive season. He does a ton of work on social media and in his role as a scout. Awesome guy, and we will hopefully have him on for our third annual mock draft with him, James. But all that and more ahead.
Definitely. Aiden, I don't think I have anything else to add for now. We will come back to you guys with a news-filled, fun-filled episode next week. So without further ado, let's roll that outro. Thanks, guys.